Without any more ado, I'm going to hand you over now to Clancy.
I'm very glad to be here. I have kind of ancestral ties to North Ireland. My mother's family were among the Scots who started out in Scotland, who couldn't get along there, so they came to North Ireland and lived here for 100 years, and they couldn't get along here, so they kept moving. Finally, they ran out of money and had to settle. And I've continued that good Scotch-Irish tradition in my life. I've tried to get along with as few people as I can. And I move at the drop of a hat. When I was reading chapter 3 today, all the things they say you've tried to do, reading spiritual literature, involuntary or voluntary contributions to asylums, reading books, all these things. I've done all those things. The only thing I've never done, I've never tried not taking a trip. When the heat is on, I move it out. That's the first thing you learn. But I'm very glad to be here in Ireland. I have not been here. I want to expressly thank the Bristol group. They have what is, as they say every year, a Bristol scholarship, and they bring some, what's that loving term you used, bloody Yank? Some colonist. And we've had a wonderful trip around, and because of that, I'm here. I'm also glad to be here because there are a couple people in the room that I correspond with regularly. Davy D. here and Nigel R. Do I hear voices? Nigel. And Davy calls me from time to time in Los Angeles. And I've always been very cross with the phone system here because I can never understand what he's saying. I thought, it's going to be so nice to meet him. I stood over there and talked to him before the meeting, and we talked. I didn't understand what he was saying. But I can tell by looking at him, he's sincere. That's what counts. And I want to thank Nigel, who's the chef and fixed us a wonderful lunch this noon. And we all went back and lay down for a couple hours and let it rest. But it's nice to be here. I see you have something we have in the States, too. Wherever we have a meeting in a place like this, there's always some people who get here early and get in the soft seats over on the side. That's known in the States as the half measures room. We say to them, next time you have a depression, call an upholsterer. But I'm glad to be here tonight. I guess this is an open meeting. There are some non-alcoholics here. And I'm sure that you wonder, as I wondered and most of us wondered, about this. What's the reason why we should go all through this to stop drinking? Why should people just stop drinking and let it go at that? It's hard to remember this, but there have been written records of alcohol usage for about a little over 5,000 years. Back in the day, the Egyptian pharaohs and in Assyria and Mesopotamia and Babylon even, wherever they have written records, they have some written records of fermented beverages. And everywhere where they have fermented beverages, there's always some mention made of a small percentage of people who react differently to it. And nobody ever knew why. But they used to think they were crazed, and some of them thought the devils possessed them. And the Bible talks about not looking into the wine when it is red, and so on. But for 5,000 years, people have been wondering what makes, in every generation, there's a bunch of people who act like goofs when they drink. And to add more terror to it, the ones who act like goofs when they drink are the ones who insist on keeping on drinking. You would think they'd be the ones that'd stop. And so we For 5,000 years, people have been looking at this. There have been cures, there have been answers, and they hospitalize them. And it's hard to realize, in my lifetime, when I was a little boy in Wisconsin, in my lifetime, the best doctor in the world at that time, a man named Dr. Carl Jung, who had a big sanitarium in Switzerland, wrote to a family in New York or Connecticut. He had been treating their son for upsets, and he had to tell them, I no longer can treat your son. I thought he was had mental problems, and I thought I might be able to help him. But now I think it is not. I think he is an alcoholic. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no answer to his problem in the world today. And that was in 1932. The best doctor in the world had never heard of an answer to the disease of alcoholism. And anyone who's got any ancestors or old folks or their families around here, remember the Irish name for it, the curse. Just always the curse, the curse. Every family had someone in it with a curse. And every family in the world sooner or later ran across a foul of it. And don't know why, but that's the way it was. And there's no answer to it. And that's what was important about these two guys getting together, these two failures in 1935 and somehow trying to stay sober and stumbling either by luck or divine providence into something that would work, not only for them, but for generations to come. And so you and I are rather fortunate, the alcoholics here. We live in something less than 1% of human history where there is any possible answer to your problem. Just stop and think about that. 99% of the people ahead of us, no matter how sincere they were, how much they loved God, whatever they did, were doomed to madness or death. Madness or death or incarceration. And you and I live in an area now where it's possible to find a new life, not only stay sober, but to feel better. And the biggest problem we have in dealing with the problem of alcoholism today is getting people to accept the best therapy that ever happened. I work in a job now where I see alcoholics die almost every day. And when I first went there, I thought, why can't you people get this? And I got to remember, I mean, we're not an alcoholic treatment facility. We just feed dying men and women. We feed 1,600 meals a day and bed down people and clothe them. We're way below the alcoholic treatment facility. But I have been a long-term member of AA. I know something that works, and I used to try to communicate it to them. And then I had to realize, if it were that simply communicated, why didn't the people who tried to communicate it to me, AAs who tried to communicate it to me year after year after year, well, I went from a high-bottom drunk to a medium-bottom drunk to a Skid Row drunk. And the last day I drank, I would have bet my life I was not an alcoholic. Not really, because that is the last defense. It's an interesting thing, this treatment of alcoholism over the years. Nothing has ever worked. That hasn't stopped people from advertising it works. There's a gentleman in the room whose grandfather made a very handsome living treating alcoholics in the 1920s. None of them ever got better, but he did. When I was first sober, when I was about 2 years sober, I got a little job in a medical corporation. This was 1960. This was just after Mrs. Wilson noticed me putting newspapers in my shirt. The old timers left. I didn't. But you know what I remember about that meeting, though? It's the funny thing. I don't remember that so much as I remember things were a little less formal than at conventions, and there was a big mob gathered outside this Long Beach football stadium. And some guys came and said, we have to get a couple ushers. We need some ushers. Anyone volunteer to usher? I thought, that'll get me for the back of the line, I'm sure, because I wasn't very sincere at that time. So I got up and I became an usher, and they gave us a purple armband that said usher. And I went inside, and they said, now, you help people to their seats, especially old people and sick people. You bet. I didn't have any front teeth then, so it was easy. And so first one came through the door was an old lady. And I snatched her arm and took her down to the front row and sat her down right in front of the stage from where Bill was going to talk. I looked around and nobody was looking, so I took off my badge and sat down next to her. So I had the best seat in the house. That was a great meeting. As I say, Bill Wilson told a story. He introduced his sponsor, Ebby, who told his story. He introduced Lois. All these people you read about in A Comes of Age all spoke that night. It really was a turnaround for me. But I was working, I got a job later that year in a medical corporation, writing things for this medical corporation. And over the next few years, I was present at the beginning. I used to watch the medical journals. It was the first time that medical journals began to do any advertising about what doctors could do to treat alcoholics. Because up to then, alcoholics were not considered very good. In fact, the major study of alcoholism, they had one major study in the late 1950s. Yale University finally said, okay, if alcoholism is a disease, we will have a major study and discover what causes it. And they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they brought in scientists, and they had alcoholics and no non-alcoholics, and they tested them and see why they acted differently, and they had them write psychological tests, and they gave, such things as they'd take a known non-alcoholic and give him 2 drinks, and then take a known alcoholic and give him 2 drinks, and see if they acted differently. They didn't, but I always thought, wouldn't it be fun to be part of that test? And here's your drink, thank you. That's all the test for today. Bullshit it is. But they studied all these people. They spent a lot of money, and they came up with a whole raft of big report this thick. But what it simmers down to, if you want to simmer in 2 sentences, they never could find anything all alcoholics had in common that they could make sense out of. The only thing that apparently the known alcoholics had in common, and they couldn't understand it, one, they all ranked extremely high in the perfectionist part of their psychological profile. I don't understand that, because I'm not even a perfectionist. I just want things to be right or screw it. And the other was that their psychological profile changed after drinking. And they couldn't understand why. But we all understand why. Because things look different. It doesn't to non-alcoholics, poor boobs. But it got people thinking. So about 1961 or 62, I'd been sober about 3 or 4 years. And I saw the first full-page ad in an American medical magazine that just told doctors how to treat alcoholics. And they said, doctors, at last you can treat alcoholics without side effects. You can bring them off alcohol. And it had such a lovely name. It sounded like freedom. Something called Librium. New drug. And I just thought, damn it, if I could have held on 3 or 4 more years, I wouldn't have had to take that crap from my sponsor. And then a couple years after that, we got the first Librium dropouts coming into the program. I want to take a medallion tonight. Can anyone lead me to the podium? Then there was that started a whole rash of cures. There's been a rash of cures. There's one I was talking with Nigel about earlier tonight. In the late 1960s, the Los Angeles Times had a 2-page ad, or a 2-page story, on a miracle cure they had done at a Seventh-day Adventist hospital out in Redlands, California. And this was a great cure. And they had cures, nothing but cures. And I read that because I want to think, maybe I'm missing something. And it turns out they had taken one whole ward to their hospital and turned it into a bar room. And they'd bring these poor boobs in, sick and desperate, and the Seventh-day Adventists don't believe in drinking, so they know they're going to get nothing there, and bring them in this bar, and there'd be a bartender stand there, and he'd say, "Want a drink? What do you got? Bourbon, gin, rum, scotch? What do you want?" "Really? How about a little bourbon?" "Sure." Handed to him in a glass. The little glass was connected with the cord, I guess, so they wouldn't steal it. There. "Hey, you Seventh-day Adventists understand the treatment of alcoholics. Here, give me another." The guy would feel great. About 4 or 5 days of this, and one day he'd come in to get his, "Hi, Jim, give me a drink." And as he took a drink, they'd shoot an electric shock through that cord. "A little less ice, Jim." Then he'd give him a drink without a shock. Then he'd give him a drink with a shock. And God, it got to get crazy. And the next day, from then on, his life was hell. He never knew which one it's going to be. Finally, he'd come into the bar, and the guy said, "You want a drink?" He said, "No." And they had another cure, and they'd release him as a cured alcoholic. And they had 100% cures. And about a month after this article came out, they did a little follow-up on the cures. And it turned out most of them had never got beyond the first bar where they found a glass without any wire on it. There was a doctor in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had a great cure. You'd go in there drunk, or your family would bring you in drunk. He'd take movies of you, and then when you got sober again and felt like drinking, you'd go over and look at the movies and say, "Oh, I don't want to be like that." And that got written up as a great cure, and it turned out a lot of people didn't have time for the movies before they got drunk. There was a Schick Shadell Institute up in Seattle, big treatment facility, that came out with a philosophy: alcoholics can drink again. Now, this was a shocking thing. But their director was a known alcoholic. And he came down to Los Angeles where I was working in a TV station, and he lectured. And he wound up his lecture saying, "I'm a known alcoholic, but because I've had the treatments, and alcoholics have an enzyme imbalance. When the enzyme imbalance is corrected, you can process alcohol." And you'd wind up his talk by having a martini. I didn't even want the martini, but I'd just sit there and go. And I thought, Jesus, I don't think a little enzymes would hurt a guy. And I wouldn't have to keep making amends. Then about a month later, apparently his enzymes didn't kick in time. And he wound up in a padded cell in his own hospital. So they discontinued preaching that. The reason I think about it, and then, maybe some of you remember this, in the early 1970s, RAND Corporation, big research and development corporation, had a worldwide story: alcoholics can drink again. And it made headlines all over the world. Of course, there's a little disclaimer, except those who can't. But, they had a list of people. And it was about only 4 years later on that one that they did a follow-up, doctor in North Carolina. And they were all drunk or dead. And they went to the RAND Corporation and said, "How in the world did you think you were doing it? What were you doing for follow-up?" I said, "Jesus, can't understand these people." We called them and asked them how they were doing. Can you imagine? Just any one of you get a call and, "Hello? Yeah, I'm doing fine." And on and on. What brings that to mind is that I know a month ago, My friend Felix was telling me a month ago there was a program here. 3 scientists on the telly saying you can drink again. And I guess you can if you're not an alcoholic. But alcoholics of our type cannot drink again, and has been a problem for 5,000 years, and yet every new generation seems to have to reinvent the wheel in the treatment of alcoholism. If there were any answer, someone would have found it. You wouldn't have had to depend on a small town fringe psychiatrist to discover it. A lot of us gave a lot of years on that research, I'll tell you. And that's why it's so important that we remember what the heck we're doing here. This is an important thing. I drank for many years, and I'm sure many of you did. And the funny thing about drinking, for me, and I'm sure for most people, is that at the end of my drinking, when I was dying on the street, I could still prove that drinking was not really my problem. It was a severe problem. But unlike them, and I'd been going to AA off and on for 9 years by that time, I was so sick of AA, and well, keep coming back. Well, screw you. Because there's something different about me, and I always knew it. And what's different about me is that unlike them, my problems are primarily emotional. Not emotional illness, but emotional sensitivity. I feel things too intensely. I'm not dull like they are. I react strongly. I'm more sensitive to rejection than other people are. I'll tell you something funny. Again and again in my life, I've fallen into a trap, but it's a trap that at first I thought I was the only one in. I've now come to believe, then I came to believe all alcoholics have been in it. I've now come to believe that everybody in the world gets into it, because I've watched people get into it since I've identified it, who never had a drink, big corporation presidents. And I'll tell you what that is. It's a funny little trap. It happens to you when you feel less than, or when you feel different, or when you feel put upon. Now, everybody feels that way sometimes. People like us feel that way quite a bit. That's the nature of our illness, in a sense. But the trap is this. When you feel bad, instinctively, you look around you to see how they're doing compared to you and what's different about you. And everybody does it, and there's nothing wrong with it except for one thing. The answer you get is always wrong. And the reason the answer is always wrong is because no one ever stops to realize I am comparing my insides against their outsides. I am comparing, we all must do this. I must compare my raw meat against defense mechanisms they've spent 30 years building to conceal their raw meat. And I'll tell you a little something what's wrong with that. When you start those comparatives, I can guarantee you, if you're feeling punk and you look around, you will never see anyone who looks as sensitive as you feel. You will never see anyone who seems to have the type of painful anxiety that you have to cope with. They may have anxiety, but it's just passing anxiety. Not the kind that keeps you looking off in the dark at 2 o'clock in the morning and saying your evening prayer. Oh, Jesus. You will never see anybody who seems to have the type of loneliness you have. Sure, other people get lonely. But I knew years ago, by such comparisons, my loneliness is different. When I get lonely, I guess when other people get lonely, they get together with their friends and feel better. When I get lonely, I don't want to be with anybody. I withdraw because I feel depressed and sad and put upon. And the morning always came in my life when I felt so depressed and so sad, I wouldn't get out of bed. I'm sure some of you have had the mornings like that. You're sick, you just leave me alone. And that's hard defend to your loved ones, What are you doing under the covers? I'm lonely. Of course you're lonely. Get out of that bed. Shut up or I'll kill you. And I know that other people over 30 years ago sitting in a big advertising agency in Dallas, I listened to my little secretary outside the door talking to one of her little friends and said something about, I was feeling so lonely last night. I called up Betty Jean. We went to the show and had a wonderful time. And I didn't say anything, but I was in one of my moods too. I looked up through the door and I just remember thinking, I wish I were uncomplicated like you little bitch. Why have I been cursed with being intelligent? Why can't I be like that? You will never see anybody when you're feeling bad, when you start comparing, who seems to resent injustice as much as you do. Other people seem to just let it go. But I have a terrible tendency to be upset by it. I don't know if any of you work in corporations. I suppose most of you do. But as long as I've been working, I've been able to perceive that crapheads float to the top, followed shortly thereafter by brown-nosers, while men of integrity are held back because they won't sell out. Who might sell out if they could get a chance to sell out. Can't get a chance to sell out. And on and on. But most of my life I have been dealing, it seems to me, with raw emotions. Remember once upon a time telling a guy in a bar years ago, and I thought I was joking, but I guess it must have been true. I said something about, I got deprived of my insulation. I think where you get on that last operation, and wherever people are made, you get to the last operation, they're supposed to put some insulation over your emotions. And somebody, just as I got there, somebody must have said, hey, God. I said, yeah. Oh, screw him, he's Scots-Irish. And so I've always had to fight my feelings. But I know one thing. I also learned as a boy that you better conceal them too. Because what's wrong with these kind of emotions are not even manly emotions. I wouldn't mind having manly emotions, but I got wimp emotions. I'd rather die with manly emotions than live with wimp emotions. Because these kind of emotions you can't talk about. We're joking about it noon today. Try that some morning when you're sitting at noon in a bar talking football. And somebody says, how you doing, Clancy? Oh, I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? It doesn't take long to discover that's the wrong answer. How you doing? Fine. How are you? Worked in advertising agencies. How you doing, Clancy? Great. I'm just opening these veins to get out some tired blood. I've always looked for an answer. And when I was a young executive, I got into psychoanalysis. They tell you in AA you shouldn't go to psychoanalysis. Who cares what they said in AA? I went to psych. I'm not like them. And I'll tell you, I had breakthroughs in psychoanalysis that would bring tears to your eyes. I discovered things. I discovered, for example, that I'd been deprived as a child. And to think I had to wait all those years to find that out. I didn't know that. They said, you were raised in the Depression and you were deprived. And I said, was? Remember one time he said, you mean to say 1935 you didn't have a bicycle? And I said, no. But I got thinking about it on the way home. About 2 months after that, every time I really wanted to throw myself into a severe depression. Now, alcoholics can tell you all they want to about they don't ever want to be depressed. But I've never been an alcoholic yet who every so often doesn't just have to kind of wallow in feeling bad. It's like having your own portable cross kit. You just... Don't forgive them, Father. They know what they do. Yeah. A lot of times it's tied in with the ones you love, too. Last weekend, my wife, by coincidence, was speaking at an Al-Anon convention in Akron, Ohio, where all this started. And she's a good member of Al-Anon, and as I like to say, she's a secretary of her group, and they meet, I'm not sure where they meet, but I think it's the church about 3 blocks from our house. It's an Al-Anon church, kind of. It's called Our Lady of Perpetual Revenge. I wouldn't want that to get back to Los Angeles, if you will. But I discovered, when I wanted to really feel bad, I could just think of a little 8-year-old tousled-haired boy, blue eyes, rosy cheeks, standing on the streets of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, watching his little friends ride their bicycles. Don't worry about me. I'll go into psychoanalysis later. It took me almost 2 months to remember. Nobody in Eau Claire had a bicycle in 1935. One kid did. We beat him up and broke his bicycle. But a lot of things I discovered. I discovered my parents were, everything. God, I used to go to that doctor's office with tears of self-pity rolling down my cheeks. Just have a drink and things. It's amazing I'm doing as well as I am, for God's sake. It took me a long time to find out what was wrong with me. I spent thousands of dollars and years, and later on I got into metaphysics and found new reasons. But I'm sure there are people in this room, just like in my life, who are convinced if I can find out why I have these feelings, they'll get better. And you'll do anything, read self-help books, do all the things. Let me give you some good news and some bad news. The good news. It is possible to find out, I guess, why you have these feelings. The bad news is it doesn't help. You wind up feeling crappy, but knowing why. The only possible use for that is in a pub late at night where some guy would say, "Hey, what the hell's wrong with you?" And you can tell them. Turns out they don't want to hear it. I got into metaphysics. I did a lot of things. I read books I didn't understand. I did everything. But the one thing that always carried me through was something I paid little attention to. When I was a boy, 15 years old, on a ship in Pearl Harbor, early in the Second World War, some men got me to take a drink of whiskey. And when I held that whiskey down, I discovered for the first time something that made everything all right. I wanted so much to look like a man to those guys, I would have done anything. Because I was a little skinny, pimply-faced kid that run away and lied my age, was on a ship in the South Pacific, didn't even know the hell. I hadn't even been to Minneapolis yet, and here I was just a little snot. And they treated me like a little snot, But when I drank, I was so pleased. I discovered it made me feel the way men look. And I didn't know it at the time, but men don't feel as well as they look. I was feeling better than they were. And many, many years later, I had my last drink. And by that time, I was much more sophisticated, slick, and I'd been around, and I'd pulled myself up, and I took some tests and got to the university without going to high school, and I went out in the world, and I was a sports writer in newspapers, and I got to advertising. I had to keep getting better jobs because I had been lured into marrying a girl in college who was not of my religion. I was a Lutheran. And I had never, where I lived, growing up in this little town, everybody had blonde hair or brown hair. Anybody with black hair looked exotic. I met this girl with black hair, and it turned out she was a Catholic. And so I married her. And I loved her, and she was so exotic. But the one thing they never tell Lutheran boys about marrying Catholic girls The one thing they never tell them, it just sends a shiver down your spine when I think about it. They never tell you, if she's a good Catholic girl, you are about to become the head of a rapidly growing family, ready or not. I used to plead with her. I'd say, Charlotte, we went over there in the Pacific fighting fascism so we could have the right of self-determination. We don't have to listen to what some guy in Rome says about, can't we use birth control? No. I said, can we just get something for the prevention of disease? They sell them in a vending machine over here at Rocky's Rockaway. No. She had a priest come by, and he gave me about an hour on the rhythm system that you may be familiar with. And I listened intently, and I just couldn't pick up that beat. In addition to all my other emotional problems, I became a national distributor of small Catholics. But the one thing I found on that ship that helped, I discovered drinking makes it better. And many years later, as I say, when I took my last drink, I'd been urbane and polished. I'd had some good jobs. I'd had some bad jobs. I'd been on streets. I'd been very successful. But if someone came up to me and said, why do you drink? It would depend on how I felt that day. If I might have said, well, because I didn't talk that well, I didn't have any front teeth, as I said. Some guy kicked out my front teeth in the Phoenix, Arizona drunk tank. And I remember I woke up in the morning, and this guy said, you vomited on my bunk, you drunken bastard. And I was laying on the floor, and he kicked my teeth out. Are you laughing at this? What kind of animals are you? One of the saddest things I've ever heard. And that was one of the few mornings I was glad I'd been in psychoanalysis. Because once you've been in psychoanalysis, you have insights and understandings that most people don't have. That morning I was so sick, I couldn't move my head out of the way of his shoe while he kicked my teeth out. But I was almost instantly able to identify his problem. I remember thinking, I thought, this son of a bitch is overreacting. That gives you a little feeling of superiority right there. So if someone would ask me why I'm having my last drink, I might have said, based on my psychoanalysis, I could blame it on my childhood psychological scarring, the repressive religion in which I'd been in, my parents' lack of ability to convey the love to me I needed, or that I ran away to sea too soon. All sorts of things. Now, if I were in one of my metaphysical moods, somebody said, why do you drink? I could say, well, you would never understand this. I'm one of those who have been able to understand the essence of self as it reaches out to infinity and finds nothing in a world of Philistinism and Pharisees. That's why I drink. Or if I were in one of my regular moods and somebody said, why do you drink? I said, why don't you go screw yourself? Yeah, leave me alone. But the one answer I never would have given them is the answer that was the truth, because I wouldn't have guessed it if they'd have told me. I guess the reason I took my last drink, and looking back, I understand it now. The reason I took my last drink was the same reason I took my second drink. I wanted to feel the way men looked. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel like a grown-up when you're a little skinny, pimply-faced puke in a ship somewhere. But when you're getting bald and wrinkled and your children are grown up, you better start feeling grown up pretty soon, because you don't have much time to feel grown up now. One of the great phrases I've ever heard in AA, I heard a guy say one time, I didn't have a happy childhood, but sure as hell been a long one. And we all understand that. And the day I had my last drink, I had been just thrown out of the Skid Row mission in Los Angeles. My family was gone, my home was gone, everything was gone. Little by little, it was out, finally went. I remember as the guy threw me out, I tried to explain to him. I'm not a bum. Really, I'm not a bum. I directed a grand opera at the University of Texas. Stuff I wrote is running in Life magazine this week and all the last few months. I've had my picture in the New York Times. I'm not a bum, but it's hard to explain this in midair. And when you don't have front teeth, you can't really punch up those consonants the way you want to do it. And I stood outside of that mission, and if a guy would have put a lie detector in my arm and said, "Are you an alcoholic?" I said, "No, I'm not. Not really." By that time, I wish I were an alcoholic. I wish I were anything simple, something I could do something with. But what's wrong with me is I don't know what it is. The psychiatrist doesn't know. Whatever I can blame it on, I just know that something is missing and I don't know what it is. And I can try to do better. All I've ever wanted to do is be a good man. But sooner or later, I get anxiety and tension and pressures, and I can see that people are screwing me around and my life is not going where I want it to go, and sometimes fear comes in and resentments, and at night sometimes I can't sleep. As much as I want to be on the wagon, I know the day comes, like that Frank Sinatra song, I just want to make it through the night. And that fills my holes better than all the therapies I ever had. There's only one problem I've ever had. I have an unfortunate tendency to overfill my holes. And I seem to have no runoff. It's just, and instead of being what I want to be, pretty soon I become something else. And judges and policemen have described me as bizarre sometimes. And I've gotten in problems and troubles. And so I go on the wagon and stop drinking. And that's terribly painful. And when I drink, I get in trouble. I was sent to my first AA meeting in 1949. That's a long time ago. I didn't know AA was only 14 years old. I thought they'd been there forever. First meeting I went into, a bunch of old fools sitting there. All of them younger than I am now, I'm sorry to say. As I like to say, it looked to me like I got into God's waiting room. You know, just waiting for some voice to say, "Next." Coming, Father. And they talked about drinking as their problem, how they got sober, it was better. Seemed to me, I always heard the story to AA when I went. Didn't go very often. When I went, I couldn't have heard it, but I always thought I did. I drank around the clock for 20 years. One day I walked through that door, and they said to put the plug in the jug. And the desire to drink left me instantly. I now have $3 million with me tonight. Several different families have returned to me. But I owe it all to one thing. I put the plug in the jug. Oh, and I feel wonderful. And when you're feeling suicidal and crazy, that doesn't help you. I used to sit and think, I wish I had one curare dart, just one, just. Tell us how that feels, you old sumbitch. What I discovered in 1949 and thereafter, stopping drinking doesn't heal me like it does alcoholics. It makes me feel worse. Tonight, our leader read my story. I didn't know it was my story until I was sober for some years. I remember reading it thinking, my God, I read it time after time, and I suddenly realized that's my story. And some of you, I'm sure, are new tonight. And that's your story, but you don't know it. You may not know it for a long time. What is it that we all have in common? What do all alcoholics have in common? Not how much they drank, not where they drank, not what it does to them, not whether they've been in jail or not whether they've been in nut houses or not whether they ever lost their families. Some people wish they could. You know, what do we all have in common? What makes an alcoholic an alcoholic? There's a sentence in that chapter 3 that was read tonight that, as far as I'm concerned, is the one thing that every alcoholic that I've ever heard of has in common. And that is this. We have all been thrust by forces we cannot understand, beyond our control, wherever we may be, into sooner or later being pushed into accepting an obsession. And that obsession is somehow, someday, I will control and enjoy my drinking. And it goes on to say, as he read, the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many of us pursue it into the gates of insanity and death. Then it goes on to say, occasional brief recoveries, we've all had them, followed always by still worse relapse. And what eventually happens, you lose your home, you lose your family sometimes. But what happens is this. You get to a condition, and every alcoholic I've ever known has been there. I like the choice of words he used. Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I used to think, when I didn't know any better, that's how you got when you were drunk. That isn't how you get when you're drunk. That's how you feel after you've sobered up. Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, and the hounds are on you again, and they're demanding explanations, and you can't even find one to satisfy yourself, and you got to give them one. Why would people be pushed into a situation where they have to believe that they can control and enjoy drinking? It's ridiculous. People who live with alcoholics, people who employ alcoholics, our mates, our children, say, gee whiz, you've screwed up half your life and now you've done it again. Why? I don't know why. It's time to break the damn shoelace. Oh, to hell with it. Go get drunk. Then later, it becomes kind of funny. Why did you get drunk? All you can think of is, well, I broke my shoelace. And people say, you've been through all this and made us go through this because you broke your shoelace. What kind of an animal are you? And you don't recreate the emotions. All you remember is, I don't know why I drank. I didn't mean for it to be like this. You don't. What is the one thing we have in common? I'm sure everyone in the world has thought this. But you don't understand. My case is different. I don't know why. You go to AA. What does everybody come to AA with? My case is different. Now, why would anybody keep drinking? That is the one thing alcoholics don't know, and that's why they die from it. And the hardest thing to discover, and yet it's available to us to learn. That's what I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about tonight. The last day I stood on Skid Row, dying, I'd been in and out of AA for 9 years. I'd been in psychoanalysis. I'd been in metaphysics. I'd read more books than you can shake a stick at. I thought I'd done everything in my power. And I bet my life I wasn't an alcoholic. Why? Because my problem was not really alcohol. I'm sure a lot of you have got that simmering inside of you tonight. You like AA, but your problem is not really alcohol. It would be nice if it were. But what made my case different is I use alcohol to overcome other problems, and sometimes I use it too much, and well-meaning people can smell the alcohol and can see me act badly and say, oh, your problem is alcohol. But inside of me, I know it isn't. It's much more complex than that. How I'm treated, how people act, what they're doing to me, what might have been, if only. I wish it were alcohol. I'd quit. I'd quit. But that isn't my problem. And I went to AA off and on for years. I heard the same thing. Stop drinking. Stop drinking. If you're an alcoholic, your problem is alcohol. And that's not me, pal. And that's why I was dying on the streets. And somehow, it was raining one morning, like it's been here, recently cold, and I walked 71 blocks out to an AA club where I didn't want to be, but I had to get off the streets, and I hung around there, and I got a vicious sponsor, because people wanted to get a sponsor. And what happened to me over the next year, I lived in the backseat of an abandoned car much of that time. I had a sponsor who took advantage of my sickness and made me take actions that I thought were stupid. He was an old, power-drunk old bastard who just... I would say to him, Bob, can't we sit down and talk about these things? You know, you're making me do stupid things that, in my judgment, they have no application to anything. In your judgment? You live in an abandoned car. Who cares about your judgment? If I wanted your judgment, I'd put my head in the back window and ask you for it. Terrible man. But over a period of time, in that year, I did things that I thought were stupid. My defenses were down so much, I did these stupid AA things. And much to my surprise, I overcame the handicap of that sponsor and these stupid actions, and despite them, I began to get better. And as I got better over a period of time, I came to a strange conclusion that AA began to teach me something, the one thing I could not believe. You know, I stood up to here tonight, I said, my name is Clancy Immelslund, and I'm an alcoholic. That's the hardest thing I ever had to come to believe, because I didn't believe I was an alcoholic when I drank. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic when I got sober. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic after I got sober. I mean, I'm a drinker. I can swap drinking stories with anybody. I've been in jails and nut houses, but I'm not an alcoholic, because my problem isn't alcohol. And the one thing that I learned over a period of time, by being desperate enough to take actions and listen to a sponsor, whether I wanted to or not, and run with people who were doing the same thing, and staying away from those fringers who will kill you, I discovered this. I want to say this slowly, because this is the most important thing I'll say tonight. And if you're new or uncertain or feeling ill at ease, listen to this if you hear nothing else. The rest was just introduction. I had to come to learn in Alcoholics Anonymous that if my problem is alcohol, I am not an alcoholic. And conversely, if I'm an alcoholic, my problem is not alcohol. Now you say, that's nonsense. Not at all. I firmly believe that's what the program's all about. I bet my life on it. I'm one of the few people in this room, I'm sure, who sat and talked to Bill Wilson about it, and he felt that way too. But you say, how could it be? Of course the problem is alcohol. We're here to deal with alcohol. I can disprove that in 10 seconds. If alcohol is the problem, detoxes turn out winners. And they don't. Hospitals turn out winners, and they don't. Treatment centers turn out winners, and they don't. Jails turn out winners. Toilets turn out winners. All of these people turn out something. They turn out sober people. But they're a long way from winners, and you and I know that. If you can be recovered by stopping drinking, you are not an alcoholic. You are a drinker. You're a boob is what you are. You shouldn't even be here tonight. You're wasting your time. You could be home watching old reruns. Sitting outside the hot shop, see who's got money tonight. If it turns out that you've got what I got, the chances are rather high you'll die from it. Because it isn't alcohol. Is it something metaphysical? Is it something deep? Am I going to lay a wonderful spiritual insight on you now? It's something that sounds like alcohol, and we talk a lot about drinking, and it's easily confused. It is something called alcoholism. You say, what's the difference between alcohol and alcoholism? Same thing. Not the same thing. That's why these scientists go on television. They don't know what it is. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous is so successful. They preach that difference. And the difference has many manifestations. But I can put it in one sentence for you tonight. An alcohol problem is overcome by stopping drinking. In this strange thing called alcoholism, eroding, degrading, humiliating, thing called alcoholism. You'll discover sooner or later that stopping drinking per se has no significant effect on your life other than to gradually make you feel so painful you can't stand it. The curse of the disease of alcoholism is that sobriety always becomes unbearable. Now, but that doesn't make you an alcoholic either. That just makes you what science describes as an intense or acute neurotic. There are millions of people who have all the secret emotions that you and I have who are not alcoholics. They're just, they see reality, but they do like we do, react obsessively, emotionally, overreact, always inspecting themselves, thinking what, but they're not alcoholics. You give them a drink, they don't even want it. Something else must be present. Now this one thing, the other thing is what makes an alcoholic. And it's been making alcoholics for 5,000 years. In every generation, there has been a 5 or 6% of the drinking population become.
Attention please for Mr. Brian O'Gorman, contact reception. Fax Mr. O'Gorman to reception, please. Thank you.
How did you get in that box? Anyway, what is it? It's just this. Alcoholics get a special reaction to alcohol that other people don't get. Makes them stay drunk all the time? No. No human body can stay drunk 14 days and nights in a laboratory. When people say they stayed drunk around the clock for 20 years, they're rounding it off. That if you're an alcoholic, you act crazy when you drink. Some people do. They be asked to speak a lot. But some people don't. The people I see dying sometimes have never been bizarre once. They get further and further into catatonia until they become immovable. Is it that alcoholics can't handle alcohol? False. Tests have been taken, and you should remember from your experience. Alcoholics can handle alcohol better than social drinkers anytime. If you've ever been to a party where social drinkers and alcoholics drank the same amount, I'm sure the alcoholics drive the social drinkers home. The trouble is you can't get them to drink the same amount. They say things like, oh, no more for me, I'm starting to feel it. And you'll say, feel this. What is the special effect? What does alcohol do to me it didn't do to my parents? Just a second. I rarely have done this, but I'm going to show you how confident I've become. I'm going to turn around a minute. Zip up my pants. That's when you get old, your zipper automatically gets at half-mast under a dead soldier lays buried there. Let me just say, diverge one thing. I didn't really know that until I felt it, but in 1943, they started putting saltpeter in our food in the Navy. I'm sure some of you have had it if you were in the Navy. Saltpeter is a sexual deterrent. They give it to you on ships so you won't get edgy and eye the mess men and, you know. Had no effect on me. I was always fantasizing about girls that had pimples and terrible. But I must have eaten pounds of that crap. And it had no effect. And the damnedest thing, it just kicked in about 2 years ago. But what does alcohol do to me? It doesn't do to my parents. It didn't do to my parents. They're dead now. It doesn't do to my wife. It doesn't do to all my children. All my children have grown up. And none of them are alcoholics or drug addicts. You know, that's embarrassing because it's kind of a thing in AA to say, well, you know, my son Billy's in the program now, and Phyllis has got about a year. Now Jimmy's in treatment. We're a big AA family. And when I see these grown-up pukes, and they're all, I just say, what's wrong with you? When I was your age, I was in the insane asylum. Nasty little snots. What does alcohol do to me? It doesn't do to them nothing. To this day, I could drink them all under the table consecutively, I think. May kill me, but I could do it. What makes it alcoholic then? And that's the hardest thing to learn. But once you learn this, it all makes sense. It turns out what alcohol does for an alcoholic isn't what it does to them at all. It does something special for them that it doesn't do for most people, and they don't know it's anything special because you have nothing way to judge it. It almost instantly alters my perception of reality. It almost instantly changes my relationship to where I am, whether it's Ireland or California or New York. It almost instantly makes me taller, more self-contained, and them smaller and less threatening. It almost instantly fills my holes. And I never knew that if it does that for you, you must almost certainly go mad or die from it sooner or later. And the funny thing about it is that years ago, it used to be people who, old drunks, got sober. But you don't get this reaction at the same time. Different. Some people drink for 30 years before they get that reaction. That's what they mean by crossing an invisible line, when all of a sudden they become dependent on it. Today we're seeing young kids who get that reaction the first time they drink, and their lives are shambles while they're still young, and all the way in between. But that's why you see that incongruity in AA, where some old fool will get up and say, I drank for 35 years. And look accusingly at some little snot down there who isn't even 35 years old, as if to say, how can you be an alcoholic, you little snot? I drank longer than you've been alive. And he doesn't realize the old little snot is sitting there thinking, you can't be much of an alcoholic if you lasted 35 years, you old son of a bitch. Yeah. It turns out it isn't how long you drank or where you drank. It's when it begins to do it for you. And you don't even know it. You have to look back and think, I don't know how. But if it does it for you, it's great. It removes that negative. But one day, alcohol begins to do something to you. And now you can't handle it. Now you go back to being sober and you discover sobriety is not only painful, but more painful than before because you haven't done the things most people have to do, is grow as you mature. The phenomenon winds up like this. Drinking is intolerable, sobriety is intolerable. So you drink, and you stay sober, and you drink, and you stay sober. If you stay sober long enough, you have to come to believe, I'll find a way to control and enjoy this, because that's the only possible way I could got to go. And that thing is called alcoholism. And the reason that's important to know is so that you won't bemuse yourself, as I did, and so many people have done, when you say, well, I'm sober, and I don't feel any better. I guess I'm not an alcoholic. Let me tell you something. The natural state of sober alcoholics is anxiety and depression and growing pain. The purpose of AA is not to make you sober. The purpose of AA is after you are sober, taking actions that don't seem to make sense over a period of time. What is the purpose of AA? Is it going to make you holy? Because they talk a lot about God? No. I've been flown across the country 4 times in America to talk at a big home where they send alcoholic clergymen from all over the world. And these clergymen come in weeping because they love God and they can't stay sober. And AAs teach them how to take 12 steps over a period of time so they can go back and love God and stay sober. And these clergymen are the only clergymen I've ever heard of who have been given a special dispensation to celebrate their religion by drinking unfermented grape juice at communion because they're still an alcoholic, whatever right they're doing. What if you could think, if I could just get a good psychiatrist and get straightened out? Maybe. I see one a week. I see one every week. And people say to me, if AA works so well, why do you see a psychiatrist? I've told them, if he doesn't come to that Wednesday night meeting, I won't be a sponsor. There's something basically wrong with that whole concept. He gets $100 for every 50 minutes all day long in Beverly Hills, and I got to straighten that puke out at night for nothing. There's something wrong here, but I can't lay my finger on it. I want to just one more thing. I won't talk much longer, but we all want to hurry home and get worried. But just the best description I ever heard of that alcohol, what makes an alcoholic. When I was about a year sober, I'd worked myself up. I was now living in a little room. I had a little job in an advertising agency, crappy little job, wrapping packages, the kind of job I'd had when I was 14. You know, this is what you call AA's rocket to stardom. Boy, that's really wonderful, I'll tell you. But one of our accounts was something called Kamchatka vodka, the big thing on the West Coast. And they had billboards all over. They always said the same thing. They'd been saying it for 10 years at that time. Vodka is pronounced Kamchatka. You know, the big picture of a bottle of vodka. That is a nice thing, but it didn't make any sense. I thought to myself one day, I'm going to let these writers and artists know that I'm in advertising better than they are, but I'm not going to tell them that. I'm going to give them a slogan, and they're going to say, who is that guy? Let's get him talking. Maybe he can make him. So one day I came by with my packages to mail them, and they're laying out another billboard, same words, different colors, different bottle size. I said, say, I never did get my front teeth for a long time. I said, I got an idea. It's none of my business, but how about this for a slogan? Kamchatka vodka goes boom, better than all vodkas anywhere. These guys looked up at me, same look I've been getting all my life. Just, so what the hell is that supposed to mean? Is that supposed to be funny? Is that some kind of a joke? And the art director, you know, if you don't like wrapping our packages, why don't you go wrap somebody else's packages? And they humiliated me. Oh, I would have killed him if I wouldn't have had to face my sponsor later. They said, just go mail your goddamn packages and leave us alone. And I almost ran away that day, and I almost killed myself. I cried twice, and I saw my sponsor. I went, Bob! Shit. You can't be a man trying to act like one. What the hell's wrong with you now? Told this whole story, and I don't care if they use the damn slogan, but it's a good slogan. And they just ridiculed me because I got no teeth and I'm a bum, and they think I'm a bum. I'm not going to put up with that shit. He said, oh, shut up. He explained. He said, listen. He had a terrible tendency when he was cross with me to wave his finger under my nose. That's the only time I really missed my front teeth. But I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of gumming it, I'll tell you that. He says, listen, they're not humiliating you. They're not putting you down. Haven't you heard anything I've told you for the last year? They don't know what the hell you're talking about. Can't you understand this? Kamchatka vodka doesn't go boom to them. To them it goes blah, blah, blah. That's why you're in this goddamn meeting and they're not. Oh, I said, I could have told you that. But you might think about that sometime. The next time you're feeling off your feed and you think, maybe I'm just a social drinker. Would you like to have gone through life with all your problems, and every time you have your back to the wall and the hounds of fate leaping at your throat, I'm going to take a drink, oh God. And have it go. No more for me. I've got to work on these problems. Do you know that only 6% of people anywhere know what you and I take for granted? Your backs to the wall and the hounds of fate ripping at your throat. Oh, God. It doesn't go. It goes. Bring on your goddamn hound, Mrs. Baskerville. You with anyone, Granny? Nothing changes, but it looks different. The reason to remember that is, what is the point of A? To make you holy? To make you psychiatrically sound? No. I never believed this at first, but over the past few years I've come to believe it because I've watched it happen. The purpose of AA, its actions, its people, its steps, its involvements, it's keeping going even on days you don't feel like keeping going. It's occasionally simulating interest in newcomers and their dreary stories that aren't anywhere near as interesting as mine were. Is that little by little, AA is designed to do for you what booze does fast. It's little by little designed to alter your perception of reality, to little by little make me taller and more self-contained and them less threatening. It's to little by little begin to fill the holes that only alcohol ever filled, no therapy ever did. And it works so slowly that it's frustrating. But you got to remember this. You hear stories at meetings and it goes very fast. I was down and out, now I'm wonderful. But that isn't the way you live it. You live it like this. Oh, I'm going down. I got it under control now. Oh, Jesus. Now, listen, what do you, how do you? That goes on for a long time. And when you get better, it's the same thing. I'm getting better. I found a new way of life. Oh, my God, it's just... We don't get the spiritual experience Bill Wilson had. Whoa. We get a spiritual awakening, step by step. Make amends to that bitch. But the day becomes when you look around and I feel the way I used to drink to feel. But it doesn't stay that way because no matter how much you work the program, you don't rise above human being. And human beings never get without problems. Sometimes I hear speakers say, I no longer have anger or rage. I live in perfect serenity. I never met an alcoholic who could stand 2 days of perfect serenity. You may make it about a day and a half at best, and then while you're looking over this way, this hand dips into the septic tank and just starts to stir it up a little bit. Oh, look what just attacked me. That's where we are. But that's why we do these things. That's why we take these actions, so that you will... The best doctor I ever knew said I would have to take sedations as long as I lived because the intensity of my emotions. When I was released from the insane asylum as a successful suicide that had been resuscitated, I got depressed from time to time. And I look at it today. About 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, if I survive, on October 31st, it'll be 30 years since I walked off Skid Row, and I haven't had a drink, and I haven't had a pill, and I haven't smoked any marijuana. I've had no chemical stronger than an aspirin, and the only therapy I've had is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll guarantee you there isn't a person in this room that is any more cynical about AA than I was when I got sober, and I based it on 9 years of already trying. So I would say to you, you may wonder what it's all about. Is it to make you good? No, it's not to make you good. You may wind up good, but that's what you're here for. You're not here to become above humanity. You are above, you're going to learn to live with human emotions and handle them, and as our promise to say, intuitively know how to handle things that used to baffle you. But it doesn't stay that way because we're human beings. And you have ups and downs, and some days it's just crap. I think the best, in closing, let me say, we're talking, my friend Richie and I were talking about this today, I think. What does AA do? I never change. I'm the same day after day. I notice the world goes up and down around me. When I go to AA meetings, and I do what I'm supposed to, they begrudgingly shape up. Oh, he's going to meetings, let's act better. When I don't go to meetings and don't do what I'm supposed to, I stay the same, but they find out about it and act crappy. He's not going to meetings. Let's say hello to him funny. Hello. Total strangers on the freeway. See the boy in the blue car? He's not going to meetings. I'm going to cut that son of a bitch off. They wouldn't dare do that if I was going to meetings. That's why I stay active. I don't like AA, but I want to keep you all shaped up. And if you're new tonight, that's why we suggest to you, go to AA and work these steps and get a sponsor who scares you a little bit. It sure makes it better, because you'll do things for him you'll never do for a friend. But do these things. And we're not asking you to do it for yourself, but do it as a kindness to the world around you, so they'll all stay shaped up as long as you live. And you'll be glad you did. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I'm so grateful to Travers for bringing me to Ireland, where I've always wanted to go and visit. And I'm pleased to see all of you. And I'll tell you one thing, though. We can all be chums and friendly. But next week, we'll all be getting up and going to work in different continents. And we better remember what we learned at these meetings. That you do these things and you take these actions, and some days you just hang on, and mostly you just keep going and it gets better. And when you do that, it's worth everything it took. I'm glad to be here. God bless you.